Welcome into the DNVR Rockies Podcast, brought to you by Strava Craft Coffee. Strava CBD coffee is infused with CBD and CBG. It's going to help with chronic headaches, joint pains, IBS, so much more than that. You can have 3 or 4 cups without those jitters, and now it can be delivered to your home every 2, 4, 6, or 8 weeks, however frequently you need it. Now use code DNVR25 for 25% off your first purchase at StravaCraftCoffee.com. I'm your host, Patrick Lyons, and joining me today, as he does every week here on the DNVR Rockies podcast, he's the voice of the Colorado Rockies on AT&T SportsNet. And now you get 25% off your Valentine's Day cameos with Mr. Drew Goodman. What's going on, buddy?
That's an interesting segue I'm going to have to make off of that intro. I'm doing well. Snowing out, man. I like it. It's good for skiing. Good for it looks like Colorado. I like when it snows, man.
It does. I love shoveling snow. It's just, I wish it was, I could make money off of it, professionally and not with a big truck. I just like being out there.
You can make money off it. There's a lot of people who have you shovel for cash. They'll do that for Bitcoin. Actually, now you can shovel for Bitcoin.
In Boulder, if I did up in Boulder, I might be too old to go around and knock on doors and ask old ladies if I could shovel their driveway.
Yeah, that'd be a little creepy. But there are people that would hire you, I'm sure, to shovel. Good exercise. Bend your knees. If the snow's got some moisture in it, right?
Great tips. Tips. Look, I had to have you on today because it's a very special day. Now, again, if you follow Purple Row, I know Rocks Pile does this a little bit. We do it at DNVR Rockies. We like to celebrate birthdays. We know our one of our favorite accounts, Every Rocky Ever. But today is a very special birthday. Drew, of all of the hundreds of Rockies, whose birthday must it have to be today? It's one of 2 people. We talked about it last week. When there's an obscure trivia question, there's usually one of 2 answers you can go with. And it's one of those 2 guys. Whose birthday is it today?
Well, it's not Jeff Houston's, my buddy, because Jeff's during the season in later in the summer. It's Billy's birthday today? It's not Billy's birthday.
No, we're talking obscure. We're not talking people we love and people are do amazing things. Okay. It's not Jose Ortiz. We said Jose Ortiz is the answer for the hitters.
So is this just something I have no shot of? Or is it Johan Flande? That's my answer to everything. Johan Flande.
And you'd be correct. Happy birthday to Johan Flande here on Thursday.
I nailed it. The Johan Flande. The answer to so many Rockies trivia questions.
That's it. That's why I knew it. It was perfect. I had to move heaven and earth to make sure you came on specifically today on the live show. If you're listening to this on a podcast on Friday, go back and look at the joy on Drew's face for nailing that question.
Yeah. I saw you put out on social media our little contest from last week, which was fun. And I'm really enjoying every day, a Rocky every day. Kit Pello, who broke up the no-hitter of Tom Glavine's at Shea Stadium. I remember that one fairly well. It was great. Todd Hollingsworth. It was Todd, I think, was today, right? Because I try to favorite most of them. Yeah. And, Todd's in broadcasting now and has been the last several years. He's the analyst down in Miami for the Marlins. So, there you go.
I was not aware that he was with the Marlins. I'm guessing Nick Hundley is probably someone who's trying to get into the game as well as a commentator.
I saw Nick late in the season last year. Nick came on the air with us. He was in the booth.
That's right.
Yeah. Nick's a great dude. Great guy.
Everyone was excited to see him down on the field. That was great. Yeah, we we're still in the middle of the lockout, but we do have some good news. Like there's been some good back and forth. The MLB Players Association, they met on Monday and Tuesday. It really seems like they've made a lot of significant progress. And for, me, I thought it might be March. They really might kick the can down the road. I'm beginning to think that this deal will get done at some point in February. I feel good. I definitely feel a lot better about that. And, one of the things that the players have done is they did take a step back on some things as far as, requesting the changing of free agency, still 6 years of service time. So that will certainly be the same. MLB proposed essentially funded bonus pool for the best pre-arbitration player. So now you could see these players who are immediate impact players, they will get a lot more than the league minimum. So again, it's really promising. It's really definitely something that again, it's got to make you feel good that February is going to be the point in which we're going to get something done. You got to hope. You just never know. The owner's side did say something about possibly losing games, but I don't think that's going to be the case. That's fantastic. We did also learn that Tampa will not be the Montreal Rays or the Tampa Bay X-Rays of Montreal. That's not going to be a thing in any shape or form. Drew, did you ever think that there was going to be a chance there could be a team in two cities at the same time? That was strange, but hey, stranger things have happened.
No, I know they were investigating that, and my two thoughts on that. It's kind of hard to have that work. I think it's weird for the players. It's weird, I don't know. It's strange. And they have to work something out in Tampa. We've been saying that for a number of years, right? And they have to. Well, they don't have to, but I'd love to see baseball again at the major league level in Montreal, in the right facility, a new facility. Clearly, you're not going back to Stade Olympique. So, anyhow, by the way, I apologize. My computer all of a sudden started putting an update on, so I jumped over to my phone. I'm not hearing you quite as crisply, and as soon as my computer fires back up again, I'm going to switch back. So my apologies.
We'll get you back in. Well, we need closed captioning is what you're saying. We're going to have to get that in the budget so you can hear me a little more clearly. Yeah, the plan, which I don't think I had known what the plan was, how they were going to split it up, but it was going to be Tampa for the first half of the year, including spring training, which makes sense, and then switch over to Montreal for the second half of the year, which would be where the postseason takes place. And so that obviously doesn't work out well. And I think you understand why MLB might nix that, because ultimately you want Montreal as one of those potential expansion markets. And so you don't want to almost take away a market while at the same time trying to expand the game, which is something we know is going to be coming in the next 5 to 10 years, MLB expansion.
Right. And Rob Manfred has said numerous times that they have to settle the issue first with Tampa and with Oakland, the stadium issues, because if they ultimately cannot, I mean, this is obvious, and you've alluded to this, is that, will there be teams moving? We've seen the Raiders move to Las Vegas. Is it possible that the A's move to Las Vegas and Tampa moves to Montreal? Well, then, okay, that happens, and then that opens up 2 more cities, and you compete from there. But if those 2 franchises remain in their current cities, then you have a different set of circumstances.
I know you follow hockey a lot closer than I do.
I was down last night watching the Avalanche. Another unbelievable comeback. They're down 3-1. McKinnon plays 1 shift. He has his nose broken, and Boston's a really good team. And the Avalanche come back. They've now won 17 in a row at home. But yes, I do watch. I watch quite a bit of Avalanche hockey in particular.
According to what I know about hockey, they haven't lost in a year. Is that correct? They haven't lost since 2021.
They've already set an NHL record for most points by any team in the month of January. They are 13-0-1 in January, so that's 27 points in January, and they're not done with the month. This is a remarkable run, and it's exciting how they play. They're the highest scoring team in hockey, and yeah, I know the only thing that matters. It's like last year's Stanley Cup or bust, and that is the only thing that matters. But ultimately, but you want to enjoy the journey, right? And the journey right now. For the Avalanche, they play 82 games during the regular season, just like Patrick, when we're going through a Rocky season. And if it's successful, you go to the postseason. But shoot, that means there's a lot of great moments during the regular season. Well, this Avalanche train, it's a joy to watch them win naturally, but even more joyful to watch how they win.
It's been exciting. So I know one of the conversations in the NHL briefly around the edges is more expansion for them. 34 teams. Like, I think they're a lot further away from MLB getting to 32, but this will be a topic of conversation next week, and a long form conversation about the future of baseball in the next 25 years. I have with Justin Wick of Purple Row, where, again, this was recorded a while in the past. I talked about there being a female manager at some point. I didn't mean in the minors, I meant in the majors. But since we've recorded it, Rachel Balkovic, of course, the manager of the Tampa Tarpons. Do you think MLB would possibly ever get to 34 teams, Drew? And even if not, what are those big markets? I think we know what the best ones are, but if you had to put some money down on DraftKings Sportsbook, what are the two cities you think might most likely be next up for MLB?
Well, you never say never. So could Major League Baseball one day be at 34? Absolutely. I don't see it in the next decade. I mean, they're not even at 32 yet. Right. To answer the second part of your question, and I think I sort of partially answered it a moment ago, and I'd love to see baseball back in Montreal. Montreal has, a deep history in the game. And we know that the Expos ended up moving to Washington. I think it would be such a natural choice with a new stadium on the river, in a great city. It would be really natural, Patrick, because baseball, like all of the major sports, they want to expand and be a global product from a marketing standpoint, from an appeal standpoint. Well, you already have a team in Toronto, and it makes so much sense to go and produce another team in Canada. So I would say Montreal would be, for me, a number one destination. I think Nashville, we know it's, among the fastest growing cities in the country. They have football, they have the Preds and hockey. To me, that's also a team that would be way, way up on the list, deserving of a city and an area deserving of a team. They do support the Titans very well. They support the Predators. So that makes sense. Moving further west, on the coast, Portland, is it, I've always loved the city of Portland. Is it, too close in proximity to Seattle? One of the most beautiful cities in the world is Vancouver, BC. I know it didn't work out originally. When you talk about, the Grizzlies, we used to go there when I was doing the NBA. They moved on to Memphis, but, Vancouver, again, same theme for Montreal. Las Vegas, the ice has been broken. It used to be taboo. Well, you can't go to Vegas because of gambling. Well, we know that now everybody's in bed with the gaming world, understandably, I suppose. So, Vegas moves up the food chain. Those are the obvious ones. I guess, an outlier would be, Mexico City. And the problem with Mexico City, though it makes sense from an international standpoint, popularity in Latin America with the game of baseball, is travel. If a team was way down in say Mexico City, now if it was Monterrey, something closer to the U.S. border, different set of circumstances. But then you also you have to talk about safety. Honestly, we clearly. But those are the cities, at least off the top of my head, that come to mind, Patrick. And it's not a great revelation. Those are the cities, for the most part, that have been mentioned.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think Las Vegas and Nashville probably are the top two. You want to move west. You want to get one of those cities. Does it fit in Portland and Vancouver? Both of them have the same questions about being too close, possibly to Seattle. Nashville and Montreal will be the East Coast ones. But yeah, internationally, besides Montreal, as you said, Mexico City would be good. And then maybe even somewhere like San Juan, Puerto Rico. We know MLB has, played games there in Hiram Bythorn Stadium. And so that could be another one of those, interesting locations. And certainly if Tampa Bay can't play half their season in Montreal, well, why not they play half or many of the games in Tampa? and then go to Puerto Rico for another portion of those games, maybe to entice the people of Ybor City or St. Petersburg or Tampa proper to build a new stadium for them.
Yeah, I mean that. I think logistically, for certain places are going to prove to be, there are more hurdles to jump over. I would think San Juan would be, there'd be fewer hurdles than, say, Mexico City. That's just a guess. It's not. I've not done a deep dive in terms of research in that regard. But from Canadian cities, I mean, baseball's been in Montreal before, and you would think it would be more seamless when we're talking about out of the contiguous United States, potential options, right?
For sure. Yeah. And part of the contiguous United States is the DNVR bar down on the corner of Colfax and York. Members, you can get a bigger beer when you're down at the bar. At any of our watch parties for Nuggets, Avs, of course, Rams and Buffs basketball is going down. Big shout out to everyone who came out to Shields up in the Longmont, Fort Collins area for the David Roddy signing. A big CSU, guy. He's a junior. Does he come out for the draft? Doesn't matter. He's big time, and it's so fantastic having him as a part of our community. And shout out to everyone who was there buying shirts and getting autographs from David Roddy. You know that we also can get you a membership for only 50 cents on that first month at thednvr.com. And an annual membership gets you a free shirt as well at DNVRLocker.com. Come on down on Saturday as we're doing the Goaties. Big party, big event. Everyone's going to be there doing some Family Feud. It's going to be a blast this Saturday on the corner of Colfax and York. You might even pick up a slice of sexy pizza on your way. They've got several different locations in Denver, Capitol Hill, Old South Pearl, Jefferson Park, and Park Hill. 13 years in the Denver community with their made-from-scratch each morning dough. And one of the cool parts is their signature philanthro pies. That's where they're donating money to various nonprofits right here in Colorado. Check out their About page on www.sexy.pizza to find out how Sexy Pizza can support your cause. And yeah, that location in Trinidad is indeed open. We're on to the championship round of the NFL, and DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, is celebrating with a huge odds boost for new customers. Counting down to Super Bowl 56, you can get 56-1 odds on any team. Bet just $5 and get $280 in free bets if your team wins. Not a new customer? Don't fret, because you can still get in on the action with same-game parlays. What's that? That's where you combine multiple bets from the same game for a bigger payout. That's right. The more legs you add, the more money you can win. DraftKings is safe, secure, and reliable. And best of all, you can deposit and withdraw your cash whenever you want. Not true of every site, but it is true of DraftKings Sportsbook. It's why you need to download their app now and use promo code DNVR and get 56-1 odds on any NFL team. Bet just $5 and win $280 in free bets if your team wins. That's promo code DNVR for 56-1 odds at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Must be 21 or older, Colorado only, new customers only. Restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-522-4700. Goody, before we get to our conversation about the Hall of Fame and David Ortiz getting in, Todd Helton not getting in, but making some advances before we get to that, if we're talking about the NFL, do need to talk about your guest from this past week, Craig Bull, head coach of the University of Wyoming, the guy who was there and believed in Josh Allen, who we saw in one of the best playoff games we've ever seen in NFL history. And that's your guest this week on the Drew Goodman podcast.
Yeah, Craig Bull's an interesting guy. He's former University of Nebraska football player, and then rose in the coaching circles under Tom Osborne at Nebraska, and then he started the great run at North Dakota State. So we talk a lot about coaching. We talk about University of Wyoming football. I've always been a big fan of the Cowboys, how they go about things, and he's had a good deal of success there. They just won a bowl game. But naturally, we talk quite a bit about Josh Allen, and he recruited him out of a small junior college outside of Fresno, California, and out of high school, nobody wanted him, and barely anybody wanted him out of junior college. And he saw something. and they helped develop him. And he had some really interesting thoughts and takes on a guy that is rapidly becoming a superstar, along with Patrick Mahomes and Justin, Hebert, and the guy that's going to play in Kansas City this week, and Joe Burrow. They're the next great class of quarterbacks when eventually, Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers, move on. Russell Wilson's been around a long time, but that's the next group. And it's a new wave quarterbacks because they can really run if they have to, and sometimes by design. Very frequently they do that with Josh Allen. Anyhow, it was a fun conversation with Coach Bowl, and I think you'll enjoy it. We do talk a lot about the Hall of Fame also on that podcast that went out today, launched today.
That's right. Yeah, Mountain West is blowing up. You had Jay Norvell last week as well, so big things going down in the Mountain West, and I know you're going to be talking down with the Air Force coach as well. So you've got it all covered here in the off season when we don't have baseball to talk about. So it's
you know what, we have a great group of coaches. You're talking about the Mountain West, and it's not to exclude Carl Durrell up at the University of Colorado. Carl was on with me last year, and I really have my fingers crossed that Carl will, with some help. You gotta get players right. We'll be able to get that thing marching in the right direction. But Troy Calhoun's great down at the academy. He's been great for a long, long time, and is a huge Rockies fan, Patrick.
So I'm guessing he's probably pretty pleased to see that Todd Helton, for the third consecutive year, increase in votes, goes from just under 45% last year to 52% this year. And for about a 5-week stretch, we could say that every person who had ever gotten 50% or more on a BBWAA ballot had been in the Hall of Fame. And then, of course, Bonds, Clemens, and Schilling, they are off the ballot. And so technically that is no longer true, but a Veterans Committee can put them in. So it really does bode well for Todd Helton here in the early going. Were you happy with that number, 52%, for his fourth year on the ballot?
I just wanted to see the steady climb, and I think 7% represents a steady climb. I'm basing that on what we've seen in recent history. That's indicative of somebody that's going to get in eventually. I know he's been aided, or will be aided, I should say, next year by the reduction of the 3 controversial figures that fell off the ballot this year, and we'll get into that in a moment. I know you've done a ton on it the last few days, but Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, Curt Schilling. One of the interesting things, and I mentioned this on my podcast, Patrick, that came out is the average ballot from the Baseball Writers Association had 7.1 names on it.
Yeah,
which means that most of the electorate, and I know there's been a couple of people that got a great deal of attention for handing in a blank ballot. Most of the electorate want to reward the great players of a certain era. And to me, with 3 big names dropping off, that will open the door more for certainly Scott Rowland, who's in the 60% plus area, and Todd. I don't know if Todd gets in 2023, but by 2025, one would assume or hope to assume that Todd will get into the Hall of Fame at that point in time. So I was really excited to see that again, that nice jump from 45 basically to 52.
Yeah, go back and listen to that roundtable that we had with Justin Wick, Kevin Henry, and Noah Yingling, where we broke it down immediately after the announcement was made about all of that reflection and what year. We all made predictions. I might have been a little bit more aggressive than others. As you said, when you look at the names that are falling off the ballot, only Carlos Beltran is really a notable name. I think you can make a Hall of Fame case for. Maybe Francisco Rodriguez, you might be able to make that case, but we know how relievers fare, and they usually takes a while for them to get the notoriety that they do. Billy Wagner, the only person that will go on next year's ballot that also got 50% or more. He got 51%. So it does line up nicely for maybe Helton and Rowland to get in next year. We'll see what happens. But to your point, Drew, there was 38% of voters used all 10 slots. So over a third of the 395 ballots, or the 405. No, there's 394. I think that were actually turned in. So that's a large a portion that used all 10, because look, there's been a backlog of Hall of Famers here. And so just because only 52% voted for Helton doesn't mean the other 48 think that he's not. It just means, look, Todd Helton's going to be on the ballot. He's going to get his 5%. But what about Torrey Hunter and Tim Hudson and Mark Teixeira? And what about the guys that are in their 10th year? Those players may have benefited from it in 2022, but in 2023, a lot of that noise is going to go away, and he should take another bump again next year.
Yeah. Here's the thing, and it's hard to formulate any definitive idea on what the baseball populace feels if you solely base it on social media. But on my account, on the DNVR account, I would say the vast majority, correct me if you disagree, feel like Bonds and Clemens certainly belong in the Hall of Fame. And some are very outspoken in stating that. So you're going to have a Hall of Fame. You're not going to have the all-time home run leader, a guy who was, had put together a Hall of Fame resume prior to his alleged involvement in PEDs. Clemens won 7 Cy Young awards. So I would think, people are tired, I think, and frustrated with baseball folks with where the Hall of Fame is right now. If you go way back, Pete Rose, at what point do you serve your time? At what point do you look at the Hall of Fame? And again, I spoke quite a bit about this on my podcast this week, that it's a museum. It's a museum that is honoring and giving people, a chronicle of what's taken place in 150 years in the game, and also illustrating many of its best players. But, you go back before 1947 and you say, okay, these were the best players. Yeah, these were the best players playing against only white folks. There was nobody of color involved in the game, as we know, prior to 1947. And then it came in drips and drabs. I mean, we celebrate, as well we should, the great Jackie Robinson. I mean, an American hero, not just because he broke the color barrier in baseball, but it wasn't like, okay, when Jackie broke it, all of a sudden, every team had, 10 players of color on. I mean, it took a while, but we celebrate the great players of the aughts and the 20s and the 30s. And I'm not suggesting that they wouldn't have been Hall of Fame worthy, but every single era in baseball and every single individual, for the most part, probably has some sort of cross to bear. And at some point, we have to get beyond that. It's not neat. It's untidy. And I have no issue with putting on a plaque part of the description of a player, in addition to their accolades, is maybe what else they partook in.
Yeah. It didn't really hit me until right now, as you're talking about, African Americans in baseball and the representation. By the time Jackie Robinson retired, he had a very short career. It was only 10 years. The Boston Red Sox hadn't even integrated yet. Pumpsie Green. The Red Sox were the last team to integrate with Pumpsie Green. That was 1959. Jackie Robinson retired in 56. So it was still 3 years. So that kind of really puts it in perspective in a lot of ways. And we know, part of the conversation is, well, hey, in the museum part, everybody's represented. Pete Rose is actually really well represented because, again, the further back you go, I think the more value we place on certain players. Whereas, hey, Barry Bonds, he just recently played, not a big deal. But when you go and look at some of the things representing Barry Bonds, one of those things is a baseball that has an asterisk seared into it, right? I think the piece of the cover of the ball is taken off to represent the fact that, he used PEDs. But the question I keep coming back to is simple. Did Barry Bonds do more damage to the game, or did he help the game more? And I think if you truly answer that question, that should give you an idea as to whether or not he should be in the Hall of Fame or not, because him, along with McGwire and Sosa and all of those guys during that era who did what they did and the sacrifices that they had to make, sure, they benefited from it, but they gave back to the game so much when the game needed it after the 94-95 work stoppage, that they helped the game more than they detracted from it in any way.
Yeah, and that's where the grand contradiction takes place, in that baseball embraced Sosa and McGuire's home run chase. They rejuvenated the sport. Barry Bonds' great exploits, to your point, helped rejuvenate the sport in the aftermath of yet another work stoppage, and the worst yet, because they lost the 94 postseason, and the work stoppage took away a good portion of 1995 as well. So you can't have it both ways. And history is history, and documentation is documentation. And that's what we expect when we go to a museum. And certainly in the case of Barry Bonds specifically, I believe before any inkling of performance-enhancing drugs were mentioned, he had hit 493 homers, had driven in over 1,400, had over 400 stolen bases, was a perennial Gold Glove left fielder at the time, had already secured several MVPs, and was second on several other occasions. He was a Hall of Famer if he never played another minute at that point in time. And you know, David Ortiz goes in. I know you want to talk about Big Papi, and I'm thrilled for him. But as so often has been the case, it seems like, with the electorate, the writers, the Baseball Writers Association, if you were warm and fuzzy, maybe human nature, you got a big benefit of the doubt when your candidacy came to be. And if you were a curmudgeon, or a perceived curmudgeon, like Barry Bonds, certainly like a Jeff Kent,
Jim Rice,
far more difficult, though ultimately Jim Rice got in, but a far more difficult path.
Got to tell you about the relief and recovery creams from Escape Artist. It's the highest awarded topical brand in Colorado that prioritizes quality and consistency. Escape Artist produced these creams that help penetrate for deep muscle tissue discomfort. That's fast, absorbing, and best of all, it's not greasy. It's not going to stain your clothes or sheets. Again, not true of all the other products that are out there. Best part, you can also find it at your local Lightshade dispensary here in Denver. There's 10 in the metro area. We're adding an 11th one as well. And you got to know that Lightshade has a premium selection of cannabis concentrates, top shelf flower, edibles, tinctures, accessories, so much more than that. And now, podcast listeners, you get 25% off all non-sale items with code DNVR. You can shop online at lightshade.com for your pickup, or visit Lightshade location near you. Go to lightshade.com for all that and more. Your Colorado rugby team is back again now as the American Raptors. Our guy Colton Trickler has got it all covered for you on the weekly DNVR Rugby Podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button for him to learn all about rugby in Colton's one-on-one rugby podcast with exclusive interviews with athletes and coaches. DNVR Rugby Podcast provides betting advice on the Super Rugby, which is coming up here in less than a month, right when the football season ends. We only got 2 more weeks of it, right? We got the AFC, NFC Championship. We got the Super Bowl. And then after that, what are you going to be doing in February? DNVR Rugby Podcast has it covered with their coverage of the American Raptors. Head over to AmericanRaptors.com to stream their games and to get free tickets. Yes, free. All that and more at AmericanRaptors.com. You really make a good point about the fact that there is an element of the relationship that the player has with the voters. And if you're in good standing in that capacity, then voters can certainly look past a player's flaws, which they should be able to do anyway, because we're talking about the Baseball Hall of Fame, not the Human Hall of Fame. And so it's hard to separate those things. But who's been a more likable character in baseball than David Ortiz? Again, we grew up on the East Coast, and I don't know how you necessarily felt about the Boston Red Sox, but I've never owned anything of the Boston Red Sox. I would have burned my skin if I would have ever touched it at one point. But you got to say, hey, whether he's a Red Sox, whether he's an LA Dodger, man, David Ortiz, what a lovable and likable guy.
Yeah, it helps us gravitate to sports. It helps us gravitate specifically to the game of baseball. When Big Poppy came up, I mean, he wasn't he was a big, strong guy, but he wasn't, body beautiful. He carried extra weight. I think a lot of people related to him. He was already a hero in Boston, but when he stepped forward and grabbed that microphone and spoke in raw terms after the bombing at the conclusion of the Boston Marathon, at the finish line area of the Boston Marathon, I mean, he walks on water in Boston. One other element of his candidacy was the position that he played. He was a DH, and there are some, and there's only one, now there's two in there because Edgar Martinez precedes David Ortiz and his election. But I made this analogy on my podcast. If you're a kicker or punter in football and you're the absolute best or one of the best to ever do it, that's a position.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
DH is a position and has been in the American League for 50 years and will soon be in the National League. It's a position, and it's an important position. Most of the time, the guy who DHs is hitting in the middle of your lineup. If you're one of the best to do it, or one of the best during your era to do it, you belong in the Hall of Fame. And in the case of David Ortiz, his postseason numbers are otherworldly.
Yeah, I think that's always a weak argument, the idea of DH or even relief pitchers. They're failed starters. Look, that's a position on the field that has a role. This is what the guy was tasked to do. And for guys in that role, they were fantastic. And again, a role being a bench player is a lot different than that. But I mean, who's to stop you from saying, well, managers shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame because they're players who couldn't play. They couldn't get it done. And so all they're doing is just pointing their finger around the infield, and the players are doing all the work and they're taking credit for it. That would be obviously a very bad argument to make. But if you're saying that about DH, why not make a foolish statement like that?
Yeah. And Patrick, going back to something you mentioned a little while ago about, the good guy factor, right?
Yeah.
Versus the, as I put it, the curmudgeon factor, or maybe the disagreeable sort. I mean, a couple thoughts on that. One, going back to the frustration that many people who love the game are advancing in the aftermath of this most recent Hall of Fame voting and the exclusion, once again, of Bonds and Clemens, most notably, and maybe to a slightly lesser degree, Curt Schilling, speaking of controversial figures. Is the electorate, should it be expanded? And selfishly, and I admit selfishly, I'd like to see it expanded to include, for one, baseball broadcasters who are watching, by and large, every single pitch and are there every single day and night. And also players, let's say, that get 10 years of service time. I know this, and you do too, Patrick. When you talk to athletes and they win an award that is voted upon by their peers, it has many times even greater meaning to that athlete, the respect from their brethren. And in the case of the Hall of Fame, why not expand the electorate selfishly to include broadcasters, because we truly are there every day. And I'm not saying that beat writers aren't, but there's a lot of writers that, no longer cover the sport on a day-to-day basis, or are columnists and, pick their spots to go and watch the local team. I do think it should include broadcasters, and I do think it should include players, and how you determine which players, that's open for discussion as well. But I have no problem expanding the electorate, and I don't want, the mediocre. It will never be mediocre. I don't want it to become the Hall of Very Good. You and I have talked about that many times, Patrick. It still needs to be the Hall of Great, and it's very exclusive. But some divergent or opinions that we don't get to see or hear from should be included, I think, going forward.
Yeah, the writers, and again, this is how the Hall of Fame has it orchestrated, because the writers, if you ask many of them, they're not big fans of the system. some of them, they don't submit a blank ballot. They submit no ballot whatsoever. They've kind of backed away from the situation, or they would love to have more than just the 10 votes, as we just explained before. 33.8% used all 10. They went to the max. And you go back and look historically on ballots every year, there's usually like 15 or so guys who eventually at some point get into the Hall of Fame. So the system isn't perfect, but again, getting in the broadcasters, obviously, I think is something that would be great going forward. Maybe even incorporating fans to a degree. Again, to a lot of fans and even to you and I in different sports that we like, there could be a guy that's your guy that to you'd want to see get in. And so we know the voting is going to be maybe more by the heart than by the head, and that's fine. But having them, have at least a little bit of a voice, maybe it's worth 5% of the vote, whatever it may be, would at least be good for the marketing standpoint of getting. We see how much fans will vote for the All-Star game. Well, in the off season, get fans thinking about the Hall of Fame and thinking about their favorite players, have them included in some capacity. I don't think if that doesn't happen, it's a travesty, but that would certainly be something on the marketing end of the spectrum that would be, kind of cool for fans to get involved in. At least maybe if you're talking about a veterans committee, hey, what are the 10 guys that should be on it? We're going to have 10, and then a special 11th one can be put onto the ballot by fans, and then the committee will go ahead and decide, which, as you mentioned, Curt Schilling probably has a lot better chance of getting in the Hall of Fame next year on the Today's Game committee.
Some sort of
hybrid
and how that looks. I just think that now's a good time to look at how we go about things and maybe change it going forward. You always want to evolve. And it's not a shot at the Baseball Writers Association. I know everyone or most of those folks. I don't want to say everyone, because I think we could find examples where what I'm about to say is not true. But I know they take the duty of voting very, very seriously. And they realize how important that vote is, and it's part of keeping and preserving the game, the history of the game. So I understand that, but it's not a shot at them to say, hey, let's expand it a little bit and include some other people that follow the game exceptionally closely and also played the game.
The only thing I do not like about any of the discourse that's going on about the changes that need to be made to the Hall of Fame system is the binary ballot, the yes or no. And if you don't get a certain percentage, either you don't get in your first year or whatever it is. But I don't like that idea of it's yes or no, and then the person disappears, because again, we have to have these conversations. We've seen so many guys not get in their first year. I think Ortiz might be the 78th, something like that, 78th player to ever get in the Hall of Fame on the first ballot, which means a large majority of them, the other 75% in the Hall of Fame, did not get in on a first ballot. And some of them aren't even eligible to be on a first ballot if we're talking about executives or pioneers or Negro League players. So I don't like that idea. What are your thoughts on the yes or no? And if it's no, and not enough people vote you're gone forever.
I'm with you, Patrick. I think it's an elementary thought to say, well, you're either a Hall of Famer or you're not, because sometimes your candidacy is obscured by several others, and oftentimes it takes a deeper dive into a player, and maybe over a period of time there's a realization that the more I read, the more I dive into other statistical data, other anecdotal data on a player, maybe I change my tune as to whether I think they're a Hall of Famer. So I'm 100% with you. Certainly we know in the case of Larry Walker, he needed all 10 years to get in. In the case of Todd Helton, he's going to need several of those years to get in. We all felt because we watched his career closely. And yes, there is a bias, but we all felt when he retired in 2013 that when we watched him for 17 years, certainly during his prime and before, the back injury and the age, et cetera, he was one of the game's best players year in and year out. He was a Hall of Fame player. I always fall back on this, Patrick. I've said this to you before. This thought was first introduced to me, I believe, by my late dad. And that was a Hall of Famer is a guy who was dominant in his era. So Todd Helton was dominant in his era. Yeah, for us, it was slam the gavel down when he first became eligible in 2018. He's a Hall of Famer. Well, it's taking, a lot of people to view Coors Field and altitude a lot differently, specific to Helton, just like it was specific to Larry Walker. So again, long-winded answer from me, but I'm with you, dude. I don't want to see yes or no. I want to see, guys can hang on the ballot and grow toward ultimately, making it at 75%. Same situation with Scott Rowland.
Yeah, the conversation next offseason for this will definitely be, hey, why is Coors Field deemed as worse than PEDs? That was something Kevin Henry said on our roundtable, and you know what? That's kind of how it's being treated right now.
I heard that. I agree with him.
Yeah, great point from a member of the BBWAA, in fact. So on your podcast, you touched on the Chiefs and Bills, that fantastic game that ended in overtime where the Bills didn't get an opportunity to get the ball. And I bring that up because I don't know if you saw this. There's been a couple new rule changes in and around professional baseball and some collegiate leagues as well. But the Frontier League, one of the top independent leagues that's now under the umbrella of Major League Baseball, they're introducing what's called a sudden death tiebreaker. So after 9 innings, the game's tied. They're going to continue with the California tiebreaker, or as they refer to it as the international tiebreaker. So that's still going to happen with the runner on second base for the 10th. Well, if you don't have a winner after 10, they're going to shift to a sudden death tiebreaker. Let me know what you think about this. Both managers get together, and the home manager gets to choose whether he's on offense or he's on defense. Does he hit or does he take the field? For the team that's on offense, the player on the lineup card that would be due up next starts on first base, and you go from there. So instead of the runner on second, it's on first. If the team at the plate ends up scoring, they win in the sudden death tiebreaker, which would be like the 11th. And if the defensive team can hold them and prevent them from scoring a run, they win. What are your thoughts on this interesting change to make sure that the game doesn't go 13, 14, 15 innings, even with the California/international tiebreaker?
I have no problem with creativity, especially when it's experimental at other levels of professional baseball. And the Frontier League's a good league. In fact, my middle son's home stadium is Frontier League Stadium, just outside of St. Louis, over the Mississippi River in Illinois. And I think that it'll be interesting. I think it'll be more interesting doing that than being able, the next day at work where you and I, gather and we go, man, I was at the game last night and it went 17 innings. And you're like more excited about the fact that you happened to be there for all 17 innings when not a whole lot happened between the 10th and the 17th when the game was ultimately decided. So, yeah, this is different. It's creative. If you're asking me, do I want to see it in Major League Baseball? The way I would answer that is similar to how I've answered with the California tiebreaker. I want to see a continuation of the California tiebreaker during the 162-game regular season. Don't want it to be involved at all in the postseason. In the postseason, I made this analogy before. It's like the NHL. Last night, the Avalanche won in overtime. It's 3-on-3 hockey. They got a power play, so it was 4-on-3. McCarr scored. Game over. If after 5 minutes in the NHL during the regular season, nobody scored, you go to a shootout. That doesn't occur in the postseason. They play 20-minute periods of sudden death hockey. There's nothing more exciting than that. So in Major League Baseball, yeah, you could play a 17-inning game in the postseason, but during the regular season, we don't need to do that. We're talking about too much use on pitchers' arms anyhow. So if you have another creative way of deciding it, and eventually in Major League Baseball, it's okay, runner at second for the first couple of innings, and then in the 12th, it's all right, offense, defense. If you keep them from scoring with a runner on first leading off the inning, you win. And there is a lot of strategy in that. And then you go, okay, well, shoot, they're at the bottom of their lineup, man. Go play defense, right? Oh, wait a second. Let's go play offense. We got, Trout, Ohtani, and Justin Upton coming up, right? So I think it's interesting. And I think the more interesting, without hurting the integrity of the sport, that you can make it during the regular season. I don't have the issues that I used to have. I don't fall behind. I'm a purist. I'm the immovable object when it comes to how the game has to be played.
Yeah, I think that's a great point too, because I consider myself somewhat of a purist in many ways, but we've seen how in the last maybe 15 or so years, baseball has taken a step back in the public spotlight, and as hockey continues to grow, and NBA is clearly now a lot more popular than baseball, and you say, well, what are some of the adjustments that have to be made? And even within the game is adjusting. We're seeing the shift, which at first you go, oh, that's ugly, but you understand it. And so we've kind of been given these different tools to see the game in a different light. So again, it being independent baseball, you understand that, and it's certainly better than a tie. I was shocked when I heard a baseball person once say, well, a tie would be better. And I don't know how, especially when we have a way to end the games in a suitable fashion so that it isn't 17 innings.
It works a little bit in hockey because you get a point.
Sure.
And hockey's about the accumulation of points, 2 for a victory, 1 for a tie, Zippo if you lose in regulation. The one sport where I guess it's most egregious, a tie, is in boxing.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
You went 12 rounds and you got your ass, you got cuts and bruises and welts, etc., and you get a tie. So, no, I'm not big on ties. I'm not big in competition when there's a tie. Shouldn't be ties.
No, definitely not. AAA looks like they're going to adapt the automatic ball strike system, so that'll be interesting to see. Might be worth taking a trip down to Albuquerque to see, what that's going to look like.
I don't like that for the big leagues. You know that. That's where I do fall back on.
I don't either.
It's not just purism. It's about taking one of the great aspects of baseball and playing the game and understanding the game, the art of catching, and to take that or certain parts of that away and just wait for a buzzer to sound. The enemy of good is great. You've heard that line, Patrick?
We have.
The world is imperfect. Sports are imperfect. Human beings participate. We know that. We're all imperfect. So why we keep striving for perfection where you're not going to have it? And even with a buzzer, a computerized strike zone, there's going to be flaws. There's going to be issues, and it takes away from one of the great positions, not just on the diamond, but in all of sports. The catcher's got to be the tough guy and block pitches and work with a pitcher. And I'm not saying all of that's lost if you have an automated strike zone, but the ability to have that relationship with the umpire and steal certain pitches. I would hate, and maybe it's because I'm an old catcher. One of my kids, is a collegiate catcher. I would just hate to see that part change.
Yeah, there are people probably cringing at what you just said. Oh, steal a strike? That's not fair. We steal bases, all of those things. The two biggest arguments I think against the automatic ball strike system that I have is if you're watching a game on television, that's not the strike zone, first and foremost, right? That's a 2-dimensional strike zone. To give you an idea, it's a great tool to watch. And so that's not exactly true. You also know that umpires get it right about 94, 95% of the time, which I think is probably shocking to a lot of fans to know, like, oh, wow, they're actually doing a pretty darn good job. There's a lot of technology out there that is lucky to be 95% right. But as you said, the art of catching, there's also an art of pitching where, look, if a catcher steals a strike, or if an umpire's zone isn't perfect or isn't identical to the real strike zone, or doesn't look like what the umpire has the previous game before that, the hitters know that. The hitters know, okay, hey, this guy's calling this strike a little bit higher in the zone today. And they're usually consistent with that. They still might miss one once in a while, but they're usually consistent. Or, hey, you know what? The outside portion of the plate isn't available to me today. So now I need to have my approach differently. So the players can adapt to that. They're not sitting. I would really be curious to see how players feel about umpiring. And if they think, yeah, it's 95% right. When it's wrong, it's frustrating and I'm pissed. But guess what? They're still right 19 out of those 20 times. Or are they going to say, yeah, throw it out, give me a computer? I really don't think there's that many of them that would want the computer.
No, I would agree with you. And I'm going to do that. I'm going to start inquiring of different players, what their thoughts are. And that's an area I just, I fall back on that statement. We're always striving to make imperfect perfect. And part of the lure of sport in general are, some of the calls that, may have been missed or may have been controversial. Look at the interference penalty that cost New Orleans, the interference penalty that wasn't called, that was, egregiously bad. I don't know. That's an area that I feel very strongly on. I always reserve the right to change my opinion, but right now I'm like, I don't want to see change when it comes to baseball and how it's played and how it's officiated.
Yeah, the Atlantic League is going to move the mound back to 60 feet, 6 inches. They had messed with it a little bit in the second half, or they moved it back about a foot. They had some other interesting changes too that ultimately, former Mets player Wally Backman, who's now manager at the Long Island Ducks, said that it didn't really have much of an impact. He thought it would be, but it wasn't. And so, baseball is trying. They're doing these little things to maybe make the gameplay better or safer. And some of them may work. Some of them may not. I think too often at times we think, no, it definitely will work and it will help. And that's not always going to be the case.
No, and Patrick, I applaud baseball, Major League Baseball, for saying, hey, let's test this out. Let's experiment. Rather than just saying, no, that's not going to work, and end a meeting in some boardroom somewhere. I applaud them for looking at all these things, even certain experiments that I hope fail, if you will, like robo umpiring, moving the mound back, all of those things, which, at face value, I don't like, but I applaud them, as I said, for experimenting and getting some documentation as to how the game plays if you're all of a sudden throwing it 61 feet. If all of a sudden there's an automated umpire. So I think that is, the right way to go. I just hope never to see either one of those particular situations implemented in Major League Baseball.
All right, before we get out of here, I gotta throw a trivia question at you here.
Oh, I love this part. Let's go.
I know. This is the final segment trivia. All right.
And by the way, I got a 4.0 GPA after last week, dude.
You did. You crushed it.
Which shocked me.
All right. This is going to be obscure, but again, this is kind of your wheelhouse. I think you're going to be all right. So 2-part series that I wrote up on the DNVR.com of every person that has ever been a part of the Rockies organization. I don't think I went so far as to look at old special assistants, maybe that, I wasn't.
I'm hitting my buzzer. Johan Flande.
No, he was never on a Hall of Fame ballot.
Okay.
Should have been, though. Should have been, right? We know.
Okay. I was just saying, I'm going to say Johan Flande to everything until I'm wrong. Go ahead.
But there's a 2-part series on every player that, even if he had a very brief time in the purple pinstripes, like a Sandy Alomar Jr., who appeared on a Hall of Fame ballot. I think there's about 43 different names so far, including some relievers like Jose Mesa, Todd Jones, LaTroy Hawkins, and Darren Oliver. Those are the only 4 relievers who've ever been on a Hall of Fame ballot next year. We might get Houston Street. We'll see. But including managers, how many coaches and managers have the Rockies had on a Hall of Fame ballot?
You got. I have to do the number, or do I start naming them?
You could either one. Why don't you start with the names, and then you might say,
well, going way back, Don Baylor, obviously.
Boom. Okay.
Don Zimmer.
I don't think he was ever on a Hall of Fame
He
ballot.
wasn't on a Hall of Fame ballot.
Okay. No, but I did feature him in the story as a future consideration guy since, of course, he's had a lot of contributions. Now you got me second guessing myself. I'm going to have to look that up.
I saw that piece you did. Now I'm trying to remember. The Well, Walt Weiss. Did Walt appear on it? Walt appeared, right?
Yep.
Buddy Black.
But he was never on a Hall of Fame ballot. Did have the 10 years required to be on it, but did not make it.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, Walt, yes, though, right?
Yep.
And you not players. You're just talking. Did you say players too?
No, we're just talking coaches. Coaches,
right.
Like Don, if Don Zimmer was on that list, and I'm cross-checking it here, and no, he's not. But if he was, you go, well, obviously he never played with the Rockies, but he was in uniform.
Well, here's one that's kind of it's almost a trick one, and then I'll let you read the list because this doesn't make for great podcasting. Just me trying to think of different names, but Dante Bechet, because he was a coach.
That's right.
I would think the current Dave Magadan, the current Rocky hitting coach, did he get on a ballot?
No, he was not. I was surprised. I thought he might have been, but probably just missed.
Pretty good major league hitter.
Yeah.
Pretty good major league hitter. Okay, give me that list, Patrick.
Going with some.
Oh, give me, and then save a couple that I get to guess at the end. I love trivia. Here we go.
We got another former Rocky, Eric Young Sr. Of course.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Was a coach. Did get one vote, so he can say he got a Hall of Fame vote. So that puts us up to 4. And then the final 4 guys. One, he didn't get a vote. He was on the 1990 ballot. He was only a coach, I think, for 1 year. He was a hitting coach in the mid 90s. Played with, I'm drawing a blank of who he played with. I think he was with the Orioles and maybe even Royals. Center fielder, Amos Otis.
Oh, AO.
How about that? That's the most obscure one. And the next 3 you should
be Kansas City Royal. Yeah.
You should be able to get these next 3.
Okay.
One of them was a third baseman. Got 3 votes in 1998. I don't know if he's remembered more for being on the Red Sox or the A's, but he did win a World Series with the A's.
Carney Lansford.
One of them is he was a hitting coach, and I think right around the time he was on the ballot. His son's is a Hall of Famer. He hit a home run in the same game back to back with his son.
Wait a second, Ken Griffey Sr.
That's right. He was a coach for the Rockies for a minute.
Oh my goodness, I forgot about that. Patrick, when you're describing that, he's describing the Griffeys.
Yeah.
And I completely forgot that Senior was here. Okay.
And then last, a guy who was on, three ballots. So he got over 5% twice. Was at a high of 10.4% in 1998. I want to find where he was a coach exactly, but made his bones with the Boston Red Sox.
Are we talking about position player?
He was a position player. I think he was a coach in 95, I want to say.
Oh, man. And this was a prominent guy. He got 10%.
94, he was the hitting coach. So only 1 year. He was 42 years old when he became the hitting coach.
I'm going to.
I think he might have played left field because Carl Yastrzemski was in right field. His brother played, was a very good home run hitter, more of a home run hitter than he was, but still borderline Hall of Famer. I think in many ways.
I'm kicking myself. This is silly. Go ahead.
He actually played right field. I'm wrong. Dwight Evans.
Yeah, I forgot that he was here also. That's
Yeah.
before I was covering the team on a regular basis. That's right. Dwight Dewey Evans. Yeah, he was in right field.
Yeah. The more obscure, the better on these, huh? So I lost track now. What is that? I think that might be about 8. 8 former Rockies coaches. Half of them, we know they were players and ended up being coaches. And then the other 4, Amos Otis, Carney Lansford, Ken Griffey Sr., Dwight Evans, brief tenures, but hey, that's something.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this, Patrick. So you go back, Don Baylor's the first Rockies manager. Obviously, he was a great player. Groove, played longer than 10 years. Jim Leland was not. Then I'm trying to remember. Then they go to Buddy Bell.
I'm missing one. Yeah, Buddy Bell.
And did Buddy appear on a ballot?
I didn't scroll down on my my own article. Yeah. Don Baylor was on 2 ballots. So he was on 2 ballots, but yet I think he got 2.6%. I think the rules may have been different. So he did get a second ballot, but Buddy Bell, who had a very good career,
excellent career,
got 8 votes, 1.7%, but he was also on the list. So I think we might even be up to 10 now.
Yeah. But Buddy had a distinguished career, more than 10 years. And then he was followed up by Clint Hurdle. Clint, never, as we know, fulfilled the promise, at least when he was the cover boy on Sports Illustrated, but Clint played more than 10 years in the big leagues. He's followed by Jim Tracy, who I don't think got 10 years in the big leagues. We'd have to check that.
No, I didn't even know him as a big leaguer, so he definitely.
Yeah. He's out of Marietta, D3 school in Ohio, D3 Power. Anyhow, then
Darren Holmes, bullpen coach, had the years, but
I was just doing this thing on managers where a lot of the Rockies managers played more than a decade in the big leagues. I mentioned Hurdle, Trace, I don't think, but Walt Weiss certainly did, and Buddy Black, the current manager, did. So a lot of the Rockies managers had really good major league careers also.
Yeah. Yeah, Sandy Alomar Sr., he didn't have a very, very long career. Toby Harrah,
he had to be on a ballot.
I did not see him on a ballot. See, again,
I got another one. Did Freddy Kendall make a ballot?
I saw Fred Kendall on there. I don't think so. I don't know if
Freddy would, but Freddy had a good big league.
Son did, of course. His son
Jason, I'm sure, was on a ballot, right?
Yes. Yeah. Only had one, and he came up recently because in talking about AJ Pierzynski, I don't think he's a Hall of Famer, but he's a guy you might need to talk about a little bit more when you think he batted over 280, I think 285 in his career, 2,000 hits. And
good offensive catcher.
There's a very short list of players. There's 4 Hall of Famers. There's him, AJ Pierzynski, and then there's Jason Kendall. If you talk about batting 285 over your career with 2,000 hits. So
Jason Kendall was interesting too, because Jason Kendall, especially before he blew out the ankle, the foot, in that mishap at first base, Kendall was one of those catchers who could run. And I think you have to look at catchers differently, especially offensively, because they get the bleep beaten out of them. So you're not going to have many catchers like a Buster Posey who hits over 300 and does damage, or going back, a Johnny Bench. I mean, those guys are anomalies, but there's a lot of, I think, guys that are worthy of debate, like you're suggesting with Pierzynski, that's numbers may not be as flashy, but when you factor in, and that's where, for me, the people who played the game deserve a vote, because I think they have a greater appreciation than anybody of how tough it is to play, and how tough, especially to play the position of catcher, and how tough it is on your hands are beat up, your forearms, you're in a crouch, and now you got to, go swing the bat 4 times a game. So their numbers are going to be diminished typically. And the bar has to be a little bit different, I think, to be Hall of Fame worthy for a catcher. Anyhow, we've gone on this.
Well, Drew, I'm now going to have to maybe give you a co-writing credit, because it turns out not Fred Kendall, but yes, Toby Harrah was on a ballot and did get 1 vote. So now it somehow slipped through the cracks. Toby Harrah was the one, not Don Zimmer, but Toby Harrah.
Toby Harrah, good player. Yeah, that staff, because that was my first year calling the games in 2002. I'll leave you with this one, Patrick. That staff that Buddy Bell put together was a fun staff to be around. Bunch of characters: Toby Hara, Freddy, Kendall. That was a good group.
Love that. Yep. It's always fun chopping it up with you, Drew. Here, we might have to make this a weekly segment. Stump Goodman. With some good trivia with
that's
Goodman.
Not hard. That's not hard to do.
That's
you notice I get the answer right when you give me like 37 clues.
Some people can't do that much though. So you know what? I'm giving it to you. I'm giving it. You won it in sudden death, right? Maybe you didn't win in regulation, but you got it there.
I won it once you loaded the bases and you gave me 6 outs.
Sometimes
and I scored.
It happens like that.
Yeah.
Make sure you are following Drew on Twitter at Drew Goodman 42 on Twitter. Make sure you're subscribing to the Drew Goodman podcast. Always fantastic guests each and every week. And you can go back and listen to all the favorite ones if you need to go get caught up as well. We are at DNVR_Rockies. I am at Patrick D. Lyons on Twitter. Thank you all for listening in this week. Kind of wraps up our Hall of Fame coverage. I know you've been enjoying it, but shoot, 2 weeks straight of all this stuff. Now it's all over and done with. And let's start looking to 2022. We'll get the CBA thing sorted out. Spring training, it's going to be exciting. Spring's right around the corner. Super excited. So for DNVR Sports, he's Drew Goodman. I'm Patrick Lyons. And you know what they say about momentum? It's only as good as tomorrow's podcast. So I'll talk to you on Monday.